What's up, ladies? Welcome to class. Today, I have another solo episode for you guys. I know, crazy. I just did one like a few weeks ago. But recently, I have done a lot of short form content on this topic, and I wanted to spend time do a little bit more of a longer form, elaborate a little bit more in the form of a podcast episode. So today we're talking about talking to your doctor about endometriosis. As you guys know, if you've been here, I have endometriosis. My social media accounts are all endometriosis focused. And while this podcast is not necessarily focused on endo solely, it's a big part of the podcast. It's a big part of my story. And I do want to do some more solo episodes about these different things that come up on my social media accounts because people really resonate with them, and it seems to be education information that people are wanting. And so there are certain things that I just feel like need a little bit more elaboration, a little bit more of a longer format. So here we are. I've got like 5 main tips here when it comes to talking to your doctor about endometriosis. This episode is more so for people who are trying to get diagnosed and haven't been able to get a diagnosis yet, or feel like they keep getting dismissed or gaslit by their doctors. But ultimately, I think that like some of the tips in here can be really helpful for anyone struggling at the doctor's office. Or, as we know, like just because you get the diagnosis doesn't mean that all doctors suddenly take you seriously. Like there are a lot who still have a profound misunderstanding of what endometriosis is, and that bias kind of seeps into healthcare in a truly alarming way. So, even if you have a diagnosis or you're perhaps dealing with a different condition or suspect a different condition, I still think that these tips could be pretty useful. But for the purposes of this episode, and because it is my personal experience, I am going to be referencing endo throughout this episode. So, also, I want to promote my Patreon that I just launched. It's brand new. I literally just launched it this morning, and I'm recording this on Monday, and it will be coming out Tuesday. So it's literally like just launched. If you're listening to this episode when it drops. Right now there is like a paid tier that is just for general support if you would like to support me monetarily, but as of right now, everything that I'm putting on there, all the content on there is free to access for all free members. If you want to go join the community over there, show me your support there, I would greatly appreciate it. You can share it with somebody who you think might need it or might benefit from it. I will link it in the show notes for you guys. But the name of the page is Girl in Pain, just like my social media accounts as well. So let's get into it. Talking to your doctor about endometriosis. My number one tip for this, the first thing we're going to start off with, is know your stuff. Before you go into the appointment, you unfortunately should you have to do some research up front, because the majority of doctors do not receive very much education around endometriosis. Like, I believe that some of them don't get any education at all, and then there are some that get very minuscule like lessons on it, and a lot of the information is outdated or just flat out incorrect. And I have heard this from med school students. I have heard this from doctors themselves who then went on to like learn a lot more about endometriosis later in their career. Obviously, I have not been to med school. I can't speak like across the board that there's no med school doing this correctly, but quite honestly, I would probably bet money on that fact. There are a lot of myths that are spread in med school about endometriosis, and that leaks into doctors' offices. And the last thing I want to do in these trying times is foster any sort of distrust in your doctors. Um, because they're doing the best they can with what they know. We just have to recognize that they are also human. And while they have this great medical education, and know more than we do about medicine more generally, they don't necessarily know enough about endometriosis to be treating you, to be sharing correct information, um, simply because their education failed them as it failed all of us. Hence this entire podcast, right? So know your stuff before you go in. And it's super annoying, and I know nobody has time in the day, but I'll give you a few pointers here. Like, you don't have to like dive deep, read all these like books, get crazy into the science of endometriosis and the research that is out there. Like you can if you want, but ultimately what you're looking for is these myths, these very common red flags when it comes to what endometriosis is and what it isn't. So I'll just go over some basic ones here. A lot of doctors are taught that endometriosis is the cells that line the uterus growing elsewhere in the body. That is not true. The cells that make up endometriosis are similar to the lining of the uterus, but it's an incredibly important distinction because one, they're not exactly the same. They don't act the same. We can't like suppress them and manipulate them in the same way. On top of that, when we say that it's cells that come from the uterus, people then think that endometriosis comes from the uterus, which is not true. I do not even have endometriosis on my uterus at all. At least not as of a year ago when I had my excision surgery. But also, we know that like getting rid of the cycle does not get rid of endometriosis or stop the growth of it. You can have endometriosis well before you get your first period. The majority of us have childhood symptoms. It's been found in newborn babies. There's no such thing as being like too young for it. You don't have to have had gone through puberty to have endo. And then furthermore, a hysterectomy doesn't cure endo. Like if endometriosis came from the uterus, then we would be able to remove the uterus and endo would go bye-bye. That's not the case. Like we know that's not the case. It can grow anywhere, it can be anywhere. So that's a very common myth that a lot of doctors still believe, a lot of people still believe that endo comes from the uterus, that it is the same cells that line the uterus, and that's not true. They're similar, but they're not the same. And quite honestly, when I'm just giving like general information in like short form content on my social media accounts and stuff, when I can, I just leave the uterus out of it because like ultimately it's not a womb disease. And while it does cause a lot of pain in that area for a lot of us, it doesn't always. And that's not like the essence of it. It's just a part of it. It's a symptom, it's not the essence of it. Um, the same way that like, what's a common disease? I'm trying to think like of a good analogy here. I guess like, okay, for example, like diabetes can cause excessive fatigue, right? But nobody would reduce diabetes. Like if you ask what is diabetes, nobody would just be like, oh, it's when you're really tired. Like, that's crazy, and it's the same, like, with what is endometriosis? Oh, it's when you have a painful period. No, you're reducing it to one symptom out of, like, literally hundreds of potential symptoms, right? It just doesn't make any sense. There are a lot of doctors that are still kind of proliferating this myth of, like, "Oh, it's just a bad period, it comes from the uterus," and those things are just not true, like, those are major red flags to look out for. One that is much more ubiquitous they're all connected, right? It all comes from the same idea of, like, endo is a womb disease, that myth. But it's also like considered a gynecological disease. Like it's considered in the medical literature to be a gynecological disease. Historically, it's been thought of as a gynecological disease. It's again, people think that it only affects the womb or comes from the womb. At the end of the day, it's not a gynecological disease. That would be like trying to reduce cancer because endometriosis and cancer, they're not the same, but they share a lot of characteristics. Endo acts like cancer in a lot of ways. And it doesn't fit neatly into the cancer box, but it is definitely has very, very scary similarities. Cause I think people automatic when they hear like cancer, like, oh, well, you can't compare it to cancer. Yes, you can. Like they're both incredibly serious. They both hijack your body in a very, very serious way. Um, Again, they're not the same, but there's a lot of new research coming out. The one recently, I can link it below. It's like endometriosis and the hallmarks of cancer, I believe it was called. I'll put the details in the show notes if you guys are interested in checking that out. Anyway, my point is when we talk about cancer, we're not like saying that cancer is a heart disease or cancer is a brain disease or cancer is a gynecological disease because cancer can grow anywhere. Like cancer can happen in any part of your body, right? Like sure, you can have ovarian cancer, but cancer itself is not a gynecological disease, even though it happens to be on a gynecological organ, right? And if you happen to have like a brain tumor, nobody would call it a brain disease. It just happens to be on a certain patient's brain. So the same idea with endometriosis, when we call it a gynecological disease, it's just a little bit crazy because it can grow anywhere in the body. It affects every single organ system in the body, even if it's not directly growing. Like on a certain organ, endo lesions can create their own blood vessels, they can create their own nerve fibers, and they create their own estrogen. They essentially create their own little environment to thrive in, that hijacks your body in a very similar way that cancer does. So, no, it's not a gynecological disease. It is a neuroinflammatory disease. If you have listened to the episode with Jessica Dodo from a couple of weeks ago, part of the endometriosis series that I am doing, that I've partnered with Elisara to do. In that episode, we really dive deep into why it is not a gynecological disease and why neuroinflammatory is a much better description of it. Okay, I'm rambling a little bit, but you get my point. And why this is incredibly important is if you are seeing a general gynecologist and they're like, oh yeah, endometriosis, I can treat that. I can do surgery for that. No, they can't. Not unless they have had further training to treat endo. Not unless they have gone through these other like fellowships and have been doing endometriosis excisions for a while. Like they know how to spot it and recognize it and they're going to excise it correctly. And there's a lot that goes into it. And unfortunately, there's like very little regulation around who's allowed to call themselves an endometriosis expert or specialist. But little plug for my Patreon here. I do have like a flow chart on there in terms of like to help you determine if your surgeon is an actual endometriosis excision specialist. And I also have a checklist to help determine if they're an actual endo excision specialist. And those things can be really helpful in like finding those red flags and rooting out the doctors who perhaps are not truly qualified to help you manage this disease. Again, Patreon is linked in the show notes. So those are some common red flags, some of the most damaging ones. Like I said, I think it all kind of stems from this idea that it comes from the uterus when it doesn't. So anything that's like reminiscent of that, considered a red flag. And this kind of brings me to my next point, number 2. We always want to be polite, but we also want to be firm. We want to stand our ground. And this is why knowing your stuff is important because you don't want to be questioning like, oh, well, I thought this, but I'm not entirely sure. Like you want to know your stuff. And also there's no way you're going to like know everything, obviously. And so if you're unsure about something, like write it down so you can do your research later, or ask the doctor to further explain, ask them for the data. That ultimately I think is incredibly important. Where's the data for that? At the end of the day, like you always want to be polite. You want to keep calm. You want to keep steady. You want to keep calm. You want to keep your emotions in check as much as you can. I know sometimes it can be really like frustrating and emotional experience going in and out of doctor's offices, but like do your best to hold that shit in and save it for the car. Because it's just more ammo for them to call you emotional and over dramatic, right? Like we don't need that. So we're going to be polite. We're going to be firm. We're going to know our stuff and we're not going to beat around the bush. I personally, at least for me, like I think sometimes I'm kind of like, don't want to say directly like this is what I want because I feel silly or I feel like I'm being dramatic or difficult, but ultimately it is your healthcare and I would much rather some like rando doctor think that I'm being dramatic or I'm being a difficult patient, I'm a whiny woman, whatever. Think what you got to think. Be misogynistic as fuck. That's your business. This is what I want. And that is so difficult. Like this is something that I still struggle with. Like I say it, but then you're like kind of in the moment in the doctor's office and you feel like I'm scared. I don't want to sound stupid. I don't want to sound dramatic. I don't, whatever. But at the end of the day, I think just to sum up number 2, be polite, be firm, be fearless. Ask for what you want, get what you came for, be upfront about your goals for that appointment. You say, I've been dealing with XYZ for this long. Oh, and you include the time frame. Is this new? Is it old? What's been going on? What have you already tried? Actually, let's say, how's it affecting your life first? Just to give you a little formula here on how to deal with this. Let's say X symptom. Let's say painful bowel movements. I have painful bowel, and obviously you can list whatever all your symptoms are, but just for the sake of keeping it as simple as possible, I have painful bowel movements. Okay, so there's the symptom. That's part 1 of the formula. Then we're going to add how long it's been affecting us. So I've had painful bowel movements since I was 10 years old. I've had painful bowel movements for the last 6 months. I have painful bowel movements and it just started yesterday. Like, whatever it is, you're going to add the time frame. Symptom, time frame, then we're going to add how's it affecting our life. I have had painful bowel movements since I was 10 years old. and it like terrifies me to go to the bathroom. I'm constipated, but even when I feel like I do have to go, I don't want to go make myself go because it's incredibly painful. It's not healthy. It is putting my health at risk. Like I need to get this figured out, right? So symptom, time frame, how it's affecting our life. Then we're going to say what we've already tried, if anything. I've already had an ultrasound. I've already had an MRI. I've already tried this medication. I've been taking this supplement. Like this has helped a little bit, but not entirely, or nothing has helped at all. Like we're going to add on what's already been done. We're not trying to repeat steps. We're not trying to backtrack. We're not getting like another ultrasound just for shits and giggles. That shit's expensive. Like we're moving forward. We're moving forward. Then to close off the formula here, this is what I want to do next. If anything, like maybe you don't have any ideas left. Like you could also say here, I really need a creative solution to this. I need your help. I need a referral. I need this test, whatever it is, whatever you want from this appointment. That's when you're going to ask for it. So to recap, symptom, time frame, how it's affecting your life, what you have already tried, what you want out of this interaction, this appointment. And write that down and bring it with you if you need to, or write this down for like multiple symptoms ahead of time. Like I said, this goes back to number one, like go in prepared, not just for like knowing these things about endometriosis, but know yourself. Track your, if you already have an appointment planned, track your symptoms up until that point. If you don't have one scheduled yet, like start tracking your symptoms for a couple months, see what happens, and like how things change cyclically and what different foods affect. Like just get really serious about knowing yourself because that will also help you advocate for yourself. And you can kind of use that formula with your different symptoms, like sort of go down the list ahead of time so you don't forget anything because you want to be going in prepared. And I always forget stuff when I'm actually in that situation, when I'm in the appointment. I'm like, I don't remember why I'm here. You know, my brain just goes completely blank. So write stuff down, bring it with you. Don't be afraid to be completely over prepared. Be a little excessive with it. You're allowed. It's your healthcare. Like this is not something you want to fuck around with, right? It is your healthcare. Take it seriously. And that brings me to my third tip. Get testing. Even though endometriosis rarely shows up on an like is probably not going to show up on an ultrasound and occasionally shows up on MRIs. I don't know exactly how, I don't know the stats on that, but it's not always like all of my imaging is clear. All of my blood tests were clear. They have been like developing blood tests for endometriosis, but as of right now, they're like very expensive and privatized and not like public domain. Like they're not super accessible. And I don't know how accurate they are, quite honestly. It's something that's in the works, and I definitely have hopes for it for the future. But as of right now, there is no reliable diagnostic testing for endometriosis. And a lot of us need a surgery in order to actually diagnose and actually determine the extent of the disease. Because that's the other thing. Even if it does happen to show up on some sort of imaging and there are signs of it, there's really no way to actually determine like how extensive the disease is until they get inside of you. So, with all of that in mind, there might be somebody thinking like, "Oh, okay, well, I'm going to waste my time and money getting this testing if there's a good chance it won't show up at all." And look, I'm not a medical professional. Nothing I ever say is meant to be taken as medical advice. Please keep that in mind. But in my personal opinion, I still think it's very important to get that diagnostic testing and imaging and stuff done first to rule out other things. And also, if it does happen to show up on imaging for you, then your surgeon isn't, if you still want surgery, then like the surgeon's not going in blind. Like they already can see like some of where it's at and some of the extent of it and use their expertise to sort of like predict with similar cases and stuff, you know, like as a true specialist is doing these surgeries day in and day out. Like they're doing so many of them because we have millions of people with endometriosis and like 12 doctors worldwide. Just kidding, not 12, obviously, but we have an extreme shortage of truly qualified endo excision specialists. And so the ones that are out there are doing a lot of these surgeries. They're in high demand. So they know what they're doing and they're able to recognize patterns and stuff. And so, and I do think a lot of them recommend imaging ahead of time. Like they want to look at your ultrasound, they want to look at an MRI beforehand to see what they can see, if anything. And then again, it's like maybe you have like a giant like cyst on your ovary or something, which I get that also could be It could be an endometrioma. From what I know, and again, not medical advice, if your doctor is referring you to get imaging and you're kind of like, well, what's the point? I would still say there's a point. I would be like, yes, I want the imaging. And that can be, if you haven't had any imaging recently, that definitely could be something that you want to start with when you are at your doctor appointment, of like that last part, like I said, in that formula of what I want an MRI. And then on to number 4, referrals. I want a referral. And I think ultimately this is where it's kind of all leading. And because true specialists are far and few between, they could have like wait times that are like like months out. I would do this as soon as you possibly can. Get a referral to an endometriosis excision specialist if like you truly suspect endo. You can get imaging in the meantime, but you really want that referral because it can take a while to get in with one. And again, if you're trying to figure out like if somebody actually is a true specialist, I have a lot of resources on my Patreon. Um, there's things like icarebetter.com, Deb Stark on her website, wolfwomen.com. I interviewed her like months and months ago about endometriosis, and recently she's like done a whole bunch, including an endometriosis surgeon directory. So that is live as well, and she's developing that and adding to it, and it's super cool. So that also, like, I have linked on my Patreon and everything, and again, that flow chart and the checklist, like I have a lot of resources over there for free if this is something that you are struggling with or like looking into and aren't sure where to start. But I do think that the tip number 4, referrals, I think that's like kind of the end all be all in terms of getting diagnosed. Because like I started off with in the beginning, just the training that general doctors are receiving in med school is so minimal for endometriosis. Like that education is so minimal. And again, like I said, not always correct, or just very misleading. And there's a lot of bias and misinformation around this disease that permeates from doctors to patients, and it delays healthcare majorly. Like, because endometriosis, it's no joke. Like, it's really no joke. And it is not just a painful period. It is debilitating in a lot of cases. And it needs to be taken more seriously. And we need to have more accurate education around it. And doctors need to be referring out to people more qualified. And so this really goes for any disease. If they, or like any sort of issue that you're having, if this general doctor has reached the limits of their knowledge, which unfortunately there's like a big ego in the doctor's office a lot of the times. Obviously not always. There are so many amazing doctors out there, but I personally have experienced this. I probably shouldn't say it, but I am going to say it. Most of the time with male doctors, there's a huge ego where they just like think that they know best, when I personally know that they have reached the limits of their knowledge and that all of my tests have come up normal, but I still don't feel normal. I know something is wrong. I'm trusting my gut. I'm trusting my body. And if this doctor cannot find anything wrong, if they have used all of their tools in their toolbox that, they have been trained with and they've been taught in their decades of education and training, they've used all the tools in their toolbox, we're coming up empty. I still don't feel good as a patient. They need to refer somewhere. That's how the system is set up. We need to be referred somewhere. And I don't know why, like I hear this from so many people online and have experienced it myself. Like doctors are so unwilling to put referrals in for some reason. And I just don't understand it. And I do think in a lot of cases, it comes back to this ego issue of like, they think they know best. All of their tools have said that you're fine, so you must be fine. And it's like, that's just not how it works. The patient's not lying. The patient's not being over dramatic. We just don't have like magical tools. Like the diagnostic tools that we have are, first of all, built for men. We don't have a lot of research and funding and creative solutions yet for things like endometriosis, PMOS, like these things that are affecting people in female bodies. They've historically, we're decades behind when it comes to research and tools because we've been given absolutely no priority when it comes to research and policy and medicine. And so this is the result. And doctors need to be referring out. And if you are getting pushback for that or anything that you like, if you truly feel you need it and you feel like you're getting brushed off and dismissed and they don't want to refer out, they don't want to schedule you for imaging. That brings me to tip number 5. And this, I would only use this if absolutely necessary, but it's effective. If they are like truly refusing it and you're like, no, I feel very strongly about this, you say, I want you to note in my chart that you are refusing this for whatever reason. I want a printed copy of it, and then I'm going to go somewhere else and get what I feel like I need. Ultimately, they probably will end up giving it to you because, like, I feel like they'd probably be afraid of legal repercussions then in that case. So most of the time, they'll probably just like shrug their shoulders and be like, oh my God, she's so difficult. Just get her out of my office. Give her whatever the fuck she wants. Um, I don't know why my doctor in that scenario was a valley girl, but anyway, that's like it's a strong statement. It's firm. I think it's perfectly polite, but it's not something I would start with, you know? I would try to negotiate your case a little bit first. Stand 10 toes down. And this is where going in prepared and educated is super important, because you don't want to be standing 10 toes down on something that you're like, oh, I'm not really sure. But also at the same time, trust your body. I feel like for a while I was like, well, I'm not sure. I don't think my symptoms aren't bad enough. I'm not sick enough to like need this. So I'm just going to listen to the doctor. It's a fine balance here, because you need to trust yourself. And this is also where like tracking your symptoms and listing them all out can be really helpful. You can see clearly, oh my God, look at everything I experience and look at how it affects my life and look at how long I've been dealing with this. Like, this is serious. And if you have that visually in front of you, it's a lot easier to trust yourself and to advocate for yourself. So that's my last little tip. If they're just absolutely like, nope, not doing that, you don't need it, I'm not giving you a referral, I'm not whatever, you say, okay, write that down on my chart, write your reasoning why, if you got any, print it out, and I'm gonna get going. And, see what happens. And if they still are like refusing, then, take your printed paper and do what you said. Go find somebody else. Easier said than done, I know. And I'll throw a little bonus tip in here at the end. Do not be afraid to bring somebody with you. Bring an advocate with you. I bring my mom to doctor's appointments when it's like something new, like a new consultation with somebody. Like for my consultation with my endo excision specialist when I first went there, I brought my mom with me. And she asked questions that I forgot about, and she remembered symptoms that I was forgetting about. And also, she offered that kind of third party perspective of, yeah, it's also kind of affected like our relationship in this way. Like, it made it so perfectly clear how it was affecting my life. And she made sure that I wasn't forgetting anything. She made sure I wasn't selling myself short. She just advocated for me. And it is super important because, like I said, when I get in those situations, sometimes your brain just kind of shuts down. And so, yeah, have stuff written down, have it in the notes app on your phone, but also you can bring a friend, you can bring a sister, you can bring your mom, you bring a brother, a boyfriend, or whatever to help advocate and to help make sure that you are like speaking clearly and you aren't forgetting anything. And, give them the game plan before you get in there, and then have somebody help you out. I think we need to like normalize that more. Having somebody that you trust sitting there as an advocate in the exam room, particularly for these consultations with new doctors, or like if you're trying to really get an answer for something and you're like, you've been dismissed before and you know that you need support there, like emotional support or validation with you, or otherwise you're going to cave. Like, bring somebody, seriously. That's my little bonus tip number 6. But anyway, just a little recap. Number 1, know your stuff and prepare. Know the disease, know the common myths about it. And then know your body, know your symptoms, know how this disease manifests in your body specifically, because it is different for everybody, completely different for everybody. And these symptoms exist on a huge spectrum. So trust yourself, know your stuff, know yourself. And then number 2, be polite, be firm, be fearless. Like I said, you don't want to beat around the bush. You always want to like be polite, be the bigger person, but at the same time, don't be afraid to ask for exactly what you want. Don't be afraid to be labeled as difficult or dramatic. It doesn't matter what they think. This is your healthcare. It does not matter what they think. And I'm gonna tell you from in my experience and from all of the like hundreds, probably thousands at this point of people that I have conversed with online, 9.9 times out of 10, you're not being dramatic. There's an actual problem. Pain is never normal. Number three, get the other testing if applicable. Rule out other things in the meantime. But like I said, we're not repeating ourselves. We're not going backwards. I am coming up on the end here, I promise, but I'll just give a little like personal story here of like if I could go back in time when I went to my general physician because I started to have like newer endometriosis symptoms. This was well before I got diagnosed. And I like kind of suspected endometriosis, but I always got brushed off when I brought it up. I started to have these newer symptoms in my kidneys and in my bladder. I was having these twinges and pain, particularly around ovulation and menstruation. And so I was like, I feel like this could be linked to endometriosis. I had never had an abdominal or transvaginal ultrasound. And she was like, well, let's do a bladder kidney ultrasound. And I was like, okay, but like, I feel like we should also get the rest of my pelvis. And she's like, well, you're talking about your bladder and kidney. So like, let's do the bladder and kidney. I was like, okay, I guess so. And I didn't really like fight for myself there. So I had to go and pay that $150. Everything was like quote unquote normal. And then I finally, like my gynecologist was like, oh my God, no, like let's do the transvaginal and abdominal. And I was like, thank you. So then I had to spend another $150 a couple months later. It was just silly. So get the testing done, but don't be repetitive with it. That's not necessary. Again, if this doctor has reached their limits, if they've used all the tools in their toolbox, they need to be referring to somebody who has more tools, more specialized tools. And that is number 4, the referrals. Get the referrals. Ask for referrals. Demand them, dare I say. Just really don't be taking no for an answer if you have exhausted your other options. Like that is unfortunately what endometriosis low-key is. You've tested for other things, you've exhausted all of your other options because the diagnostic tools for it are so sucky and unreliable. It's kind of one of those things of like, okay, we're diagnosing by exclusion here. All the symptoms match. We haven't been able to connect it to anything else or any other diagnosis. So it's most likely endo. That is like kind of ultimately what happens as of right now. So get the referrals if you are not getting where you want to get with a general physician. And when it comes to endometriosis, it's not, you wouldn't have your GP treat a tumor. You got to get an oncologist. That's how it works. And then, like I said, not taking no for an answer. I want you to note that in my chart that you're refusing this for whatever reason. I want it. Printed copy of it, and then I'm going to be on my way. And of course, bonus tip number 6, bring somebody with you, bring an advocate with you. A little recap. So that was talking to your doctor about endometriosis, my tips based on my experience and all of the things I have learned speaking with other patients online. This is kind of just the list I have come up with here in terms of how to actually have a productive conversation, how to actually prepare for these appointments. And I will probably be making like a whole other document on this to put on my Patreon. And again, plugging my Patreon, go join me over there. Everything on there as of right now is completely free. I will be adding like masterclasses on there, but right now there are symptom trackers, like just very basic symptom trackers. One is just like a general one. And then there's also one that's like GI specific. And then I've also got one that's more like mental health specific. I have my musings, I call them, just like essays that I have written that I've transferred over from my Substack. And I will continue to put things out on Patreon instead going forward. And then also, like I said, that flowchart and the checklist to help you determine if your specialist is actually a specialist. And I'm hoping to like build a full community over there so we can have a closer connection. You know, I feel like there's a big divide in conversing with people in my comment sections gets a little difficult sometimes and a little overwhelming. And I also try not to be on social media 24 hours a day because that's not good for me or anybody. And so I think having like a closer knit community on Patreon, being able to chat with people there, like share our experiences and give validation and support, and you know, talk about how to navigate these doctor's appointments, I think would be like really, really useful for the community. So if you agree, please go join me over there, Girl in Pain on Patreon. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, anything to add, any concerns, please reach out to me. on Patreon, if you would like, or you can email me, autumn@thehealthclassSheDeserves.com. I do love hearing from you guys. I'm so glad we did another little solo cast, and I hope that you found it useful. And if you know someone like struggling with this, struggling to get diagnosed, suspects endometriosis or some other condition, especially like a female specific condition, definitely send this episode to them, share it with them. Check out my social media accounts. I changed my Instagram username finally. It's now at Girl in Pain with 2 little underscores because one was taken. And TikTok, Girl in Pain, the username is at Autumn's Endo Journey with periods in between. All of that is linked below for you guys as always. Thank you so much for listening and for being here. Hope everyone's having a wonderful, pain-free day, and class dismissed.